In this lesson, we're going to break down the UI. Alright, so here I have 03_begin. To open up that project file, you can go to File and Open Level. Clicking on that should bring you to your project files folder, and you can open that up. And here we go. So let's go ahead and quickly break down the interface of the Unreal Engine 4. Unreal Engine 4 is pretty new. If you have experienced UDK, the Unreal Development Kit, this is going to look a lot different. However, I find that it's very easy to use and much easier to use than previous versions. So right up here at the top, we have our menu bar. The menu bar is pretty self-explanatory across most softwares. You can access things like opening and saving levels and managing your files. Beyond that, we have our modes palette, our modes panel. In this panel, you have things like these different tabs. We can place objects, we can paint objects, we can create landscapes, and we can also create foliage. Now, because my UI is squished down a little bit because of the screen size, it's going to look a little bit different. So you'll see right here on my toolbar, I have one more button there, and this is called Geometry Editing. Now, if I want to see that actually on the screen, what I'll need to do is simply grab right here in the middle, this little line that divides the panels. If I left click and drag that, I can now move and kind of resize my different areas. And so now I can see all 5 of those tabs instead of just 4. But anytime that you see this double arrow, just know that there are more buttons along that toolbar. Now, whenever we start going through these different modes, we are going to get different options in those modes. So for example, the place mode, if we drag this down a little bit, you can see that we have geometry, we have lights, visual elements, some basic elements, volumes, and then we could take a look at all of those different classes that are wrapped up in this section here. You can go ahead and you can explore through the paint. We're not going to be worrying about that. We also have landscape, foliage, and then geometry editing. For a very beginner in Unreal Engine 4, the only 2 that you should really worry about are going to be the place mode and then also geometry editing mode. So let's move on from here. We have the content browser. The content browser is really important because this is where all of our assets are going to be located in our project. And so as you can see in my game folder, I have all of these different folders that are available. I have architecture, audio, blueprints, and then I have some custom folders that I've created like materials, props, and textures. We also have things like maps, materials, and particles. All of these, if we left click on those folders, we can come in and take a look at those assets that are actually in the folders. So in my textures, obviously we're going to have different types of textures that we can use. If we go into something like props, we'll see static meshes. Even if I go into my DT props, there will be other static meshes here as well. So that's the content browser. From the content browser, let's go ahead and move across to the toolbar. The toolbar is just a quick access to some of the major tools that we'll find inside of Unreal Engine. So if I want to get to my content browser very quickly, I can left click on that and you'll see that it brings that up. I can open up the marketplace. The marketplace is a great place to go and look at some of the existing projects that Unreal has created. We also have things like quick settings and world settings, blueprints, matinee, and then we have our build options. This is where we can build our lighting and build our game and get it ready for packaging. And then beyond that, we have things like simulate, and if we click on that arrow, we have play and play options and launch. So this will allow us to play inside of our editor once we have created specific elements in our game. So that's the toolbar. Remember that a lot of these can be executed from other parts in the interface. Most of the time we'll be using this toolbar here. Now beyond that, we have the scene outliner. The scene outliner is going to show us all of the objects that we have in our current level. And so if I pull this down, you can see that we have very few items. We have an atmospheric fog object. If I left click on that, it's actually going to select that in the scene, as you can see it right here. The BP sky sphere, which is the geometry that is holding this sky information. We have a light source, we have a player start, and then we have the template map, which is this little cube that we see here, this flat surface. Now, whenever you select objects in your scene in the viewport, which is what you see here, the large area, this is where we're going to be spending most of our time. Once you have objects selected, you'll see that the details panel begins to fill out, and it has information like the transform information of the selected object. If it's a static mesh, it's going to hold its information. Any materials that are on it, including any lighting options that we want to tweak or modify, and then going even further down. Okay, so we can get kind of granular with the selected objects. Most of the time we won't get into some of the granular pieces of that, only for specific needs. Alright, so that is the details panel, and then of course we have the viewport. The viewport is very, very important. We're going to be spending most of our time in there. We're going to be using lots of different tools and techniques, manipulating our objects and positioning them and rotating them to create a very specific look for our level. So we're going to go ahead and stop the lesson here, because in the next lesson we're going to take a look at viewport navigation, where we can go in and we'll learn how to navigate in here, move around, selecting objects and things like that, and then we'll also talk about placing objects in that viewport. So we'll go ahead and get started with that in our next lesson.